Matthew 23 describes Christ's last attempt to reach the leadership of Israel. They ignore him. He leaves the temple and isn't very happy. He's sad. He doesn't want any of the Israelites, any of the world for that matter, to be lost, any folk in the world to be lost. Everyone, I'm sure, is aware of the content of John 3 and verse 16. He is upset, and the disciples, in an attempt to cheer him up, show him the temple, and he says to them that not one stone will be left upon another that shall not be cast down. Now the disciples associated the destruction of the temple with the end of the world, so they then asked him a question, asking or wanting to find out what the signs would be that would basically precede the end of the world, the destruction of the temple, and in their eyes, the end of the world. Christ, went on to describe certain events. He said there would be wars and rumours of wars, there would be famines, pestilence and earthquakes in diverse places. All of these things preceded the destruction of the temple in AD 70. And we're seeing a rapid increase, or we have seen for a long time now, a rapid increase in these things in our time. In AD 67, the final warning was there in place. Christ had said, when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, then it's time to flee. Luke puts it this way in Luke 21. He says, when you see Jerusalem encompassed with armies, then it's time to go. In the time of Nehemiah, there were people outside of Jerusalem trading on the Sabbath, and that was basically Sabbath breaking. So what Nehemiah did, he came out of the city and kind of created a boundary, inside of which everything was counted as holy ground. And the sign for the disciples and those in Jerusalem to flee was the armies of Rome standing outside the city. This took place in 67 AD. The armies of Cestius came, and for no apparent reason they retreated. The folk who had taken heed to Christ's warning given some 36 years earlier saw this as a sign, and they left. And it's interesting that Christ gave a certain instruction. He says, pray that your flight not be on the Sabbath day, in the winter on the Sabbath day. Now a lot of people say that the Sabbath was done away with at the cross. Now Christ is clearly giving instruction for people to pray 36 years after the cross that their flight be not on the seventh day Sabbath. Moving on though, as I said earlier, all of these signs in our time we're seeing a fulfillment of. The earthquakes, watching some videos on YouTube today, news reports telling us quite clearly that the earthquakes of late have been so great that they've actually moved the earth on its axis. Some have sped up days by millionths of a second, and some have slowed them down. The Inuit people in the Arctic regions have clearly seen a change in climate, a change in the position of the stars, the moon and the sun. And remember, we're told to look for signs in the heavens, in the earth and the heavens. We're seeing an increase in wars, not only wars but rumours of wars. I mean, Russia now warning America about the potential troubles that will come if they invade Iran. And how many wars have we had of late? And also, as I've said, rumours of wars, pestilences or diseases in various places, famines and so on and so forth. Matthew 24 says that all these are the beginning of sorrows, and I think we've gone through that stage now. We've experienced the beginning of sorrows, and what will follow, according to Matthew 24, is the Most High's people will be delivered up to be afflicted and killed. And we're seeing bills like the NDAA being passed, signed off by Obama, which basically give the government rights to deliver up people, afflict them and even kill them without trial. People will be tortured, people will be oppressed, and it's all about terrorism now. But a time will come when a small group of people will go against the laws of the land having gone against the laws of the Most High, and these people will be seen as, looked upon as, enemies of the state, enemies of law and order, and they will be accused of bringing down the judgments of the Most High upon the world, and it will be encouraged, as it was in Christ's day. Remember, in Christ's day, Caiaphas said, it's expedient that this one man perish, referring to Christ, rather than a nation. And it will be very similar in the last days, in the fact that the powers that be will say something very similar to what Caiaphas said. This small group of the Most High's people must be gotten rid of. And if you want a description of the Most High's people just prior to the return of Christ, look at Revelation chapter 12 and verse 17, as well as Revelation 14 and verse 12. You'll see that they're a small group in the fact that Revelation 12 and verse 17 describes them as a remnant, and they keep the commandments. Why? I stress this again, I've stressed it in other videos, not in order to be saved. That's a great confusion. They keep the commandments, as Messiah said, because they love him, John 14 and verse 15, and they're strengthened to do so by Messiah. Philippians 4 and verse 13, I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. Now, seeing that all these things shall come to pass, what do we need to do? Matthew 14 describes a story. The disciples are in a boat, and Christ is on the shore, and all of a sudden a storm comes, and the disciples are so afraid. They're afraid, even though not too long before that time Christ had calmed the storm. Maybe because he wasn't with them, they were afraid. But they're panicking, and all of a sudden they see something or someone in the distance walking on the water. They're afraid because they think it's a ghost, some kind of phantom. But Christ calls out to them and says, "Be not afraid, it is I." Peter says, "If it's really you, then let me come to you." Kind of an expression of doubt there, if it's really you. And that's sometimes a problem in our experience. That big if word comes in. We don't really believe, and it's often because of what we're struggling with. We don't really believe that the Most High will answer our prayers. But I'm telling you now, He does. He does. He does. When we return His word unto Him, it doesn't return unto Him void, according to Isaiah 55 and verse 11. When we return the promises found in His word to Him, when we claim them by faith, they always have the desired effect. So Peter wants to come to Christ, and we all have to come to Christ. We all have to come to Christ, and we all have to leave the boat, as it were, of life, and go to Christ. Now the water was stormy, and as I said earlier, we're about to go through a storm. Now, what enabled Peter to leave the boat and walk on the water toward Messiah? Remember, he said, "Can I come to you? If it's you, let me come to you." What did Christ say? Read the story, Matthew 14. Not sure of the verses, read it, you'll come to the story. Messiah said, "Come." Messiah said, "Come." And then Peter went. Now, what enabled Peter to walk on the water? It was faith in that which Messiah had said. Faith in that which Messiah had said. Now, remember what Christ himself said. Matthew 4 and verse 4, he says, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God." Romans chapter 1 and verse 17 tells us that the just shall live by faith. Hebrews 11 and verse 6 tells us that it's impossible, without faith it's impossible to please God, for all that come to Him. Remember, Peter went to Christ on the water, must believe that He is, and is a rewarder of them that diligently seek Him. So Peter coming out of the boat and heading toward Christ, being able to do so because of faith in the Word is typical of our journey as Christians. He calls us to come, and we accept Him by faith, exercising that measure of faith given to us as described in Romans chapter 12 and verse 3. We exercise that faith and we keep our eyes fixed on Him, and He enables us to walk through the storms of life, but we have to keep our eyes fixed on Him. I think it's Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 2 tells us that we ought to always keep our eyes fixed on Christ, the author and the finisher of our faith, and we do that through the Word. We do that through the Word. So Peter walks toward Christ, and he's okay as long as he keeps his eyes on Christ, and we're okay as long as we keep our eyes on Christ. The storm that is to come will be okay going through it as long as we keep our eyes on Christ. Christ was with the 3 Hebrew boys, as described in Daniel 3, when they were in the fiery furnace. In the fiery furnace that are the 7 last plagues, he will be with those who are faithful. He will keep them in the storm. He will protect them from the flames of persecution. So Peter's on his way to Christ, but for some reason, maybe, I don't know what reason, but he took his eyes off Christ. He looked around at the disciples, maybe to say, look at me, look what I am doing, look what I am doing. Immediately, when he looked back, a wave, we're told, got in between him and Christ, and he lost sight of Christ, and then began to sink down into the water. And his only hope was to cry out for Christ. He says, Lord, help me. And just before he went under, Christ reached down, took him by the hand, lifted him up, and carried him into the boat. And that's basically showing us that our walk with Christ, at times we do take our eyes off him, but when we do, we shouldn't give up. We should call out to him, and he will hear us. Sometimes he allows us to go down a little, that we might learn important lessons, but he'll always draw us up. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there's a time of trouble such as never was, almost upon us, and our only hope is to, from today, keep our eyes fixed. Turn your eyes upon Messiah, and keep your eyes fixed on him. How do you do this? Through his word. Through his word. Hide his word in your heart, for we are promised in Psalms 119 and verse 11, if we hide his word in our hearts, we won't sin against him. I'm going to end it there. There's maybe more I could say, but I'm looking at the time on my camera. It's almost run out of time. I'm 12 minutes just over. I'm hoping that which I've said has made sense. Look at the signs. Look at the signs. Luke says, when you see these things come to pass, look up, for redemption draweth nigh. We need to today surrender all to Messiah in preparation for what is to come. It's not enough now to be getting ready. We have to be ready, and we can be ready in an instant if we but surrender all to Christ and live by every word that proceedeth out of his mouth, not by feeling anymore. We have to live by, and it is written.